Revenge office stories. When she stood in front of the entire department and told me to clear my desk, she thought she was erasing me. What she didn't realize is that she wasn't just firing an employee. She was creating a ghost who knew every secret, every vulnerability, and every fatal flaw in her $400 million career-defining project. She thought it was an execution. It was a countdown, and I was the one holding the clock. For 14 years, Ethelred Technologies was more than my employer, it was my world. A world I helped build. I came in as a junior analyst, fresh out of business school, and buzzing with ideas about the future of aerospace. By 36, I was the senior vice president of strategic divestment. I know the title sounds stuffy, but it really meant I was the architect of the company's future. My focus for over a decade had been the company's most prestigious, yet most dated division, our legacy aerospace and defense wing. We built parts that were reliable, respected, and becoming obsolete fast. My job was to figure out what to do with a giant, profitable, but slowly dying piece of our business. I wasn't just an employee. I was the company historian. I was there when we landed the huge, multi-generational contracts, and I was the one writing the reports warning that those contracts would eventually dry up. I knew the engineers by name, I knew the hidden talents of our manufacturing plants, and I knew where every digital skeleton was buried in our maze of a server network. My team and I were the quiet ones. We didn't make a lot of noise, but our work kept the lights on and the stock price stable. We were the foundation. And foundations, as a rule, are supposed to be invisible. That all changed when Eleanor Vance arrived. She was hired from the outside as our new chief operating officer, a corporate celebrity famous for her brutal efficiency. Her reputation walked into the building 10 minutes before she did. She was a turnaround artist, a shareholder's dream, and, if you listen to the whispers from her last 2 companies, a human blowtorch who left nothing but scorched earth in her wake. On her first day, she was all charisma and blindingly white teeth. She walked the floors, shaking hands, her voice a smooth melody of corporate buzzwords. Synergy, optimization, paradigm shift. She praised my division's history, calling us the bedrock of Ethelred. But her eyes, cold and calculating, never matched her smile. They scanned everything, not with appreciation, but for weakness, for assets to strip, for people to eliminate. My big project, the one that had eaten up the last 2 years of my life, was codenamed Project Chimera. It was my answer to our slow march toward irrelevance. The plan was beautiful. We'd carve out the entire legacy aerospace division, package it up perfectly, and sell it to a private equity firm that knew how to maximize value from assets like ours. The sale would pull in around $400 million. That cash wouldn't just pay down debt. It was the war chest we needed to pivot hard into next-gen satellite communications, a market I'd been pushing for years. Project Chimera wasn't just a deal. It was the bridge to Ethelred's future. It was my baby. From the moment Eleanor grasped the scale of Chimera, it stopped being my project. It became her project. In her first town hall, she presented a slightly tweaked version of my slide deck as her own vision for a new Ethelred. She talked about the $400 million deal like the idea had just popped into her head during her morning yoga. My name was never mentioned. I sat in the 3rd row, my team shooting me sympathetic looks, and I felt that first cold prickle of dread. This was her move. She didn't build things. She claimed them. Project Chimera was her golden ticket. The CEO was close to retiring, and pulling off a deal this big would make her the undisputed successor. That $400 million figure became her mantra. It was in every memo, every interview with the financial press. She was branding herself as the company's savior, and Chimera was her chariot. The problem? She was a chariot driver who'd never even bothered to look at the wheels. She loved the glorious destination, but had no time for the nuts and bolts of the journey. And I knew every single nut and bolt. I'd structured the deal. I'd built the relationship with the buyers, a sharp, aggressive private equity firm called Blackwood Capital. I had personally hammered out the finer points of the agreement, the clauses and subclauses that no one else, especially Eleanor, had the patience to read. She saw them as legal boilerplate. I knew they were the load-bearing walls of the entire structure. As the deal got closer, Eleanor's toxicity went into full bloom. Her management style was a masterclass in psychological warfare. She'd move deadlines up by weeks without warning, then criticize the frantic scramble as poor planning. She would publicly question my team's data in meetings, creating this constant haze of doubt. But her favorite move was to call me out in front of everyone. In one brutal meeting, she held up a cost analysis report I'd spent a month on. "This is what we're paying a six-figure salary for," she asked the room, letting the report drop to the table. I expect vision, not just arithmetic. The critique was nonsense, but it wasn't about being right. It was about diminishing me, making it clear I was just a cog in her machine. For her, the final straw came 2 weeks before the deal was supposed to close. We were in a final review with the Blackwood Capital team. Their lead negotiator, Marcus Thorne, was a stickler for detail, which is why we'd always gotten along. He asked a sharp question about the post-acquisition data migration protocols, a complex but critical part of making sure the division could run on its own after the sale. Eleanor, ever the big-picture person, tried to wave it off. "Our teams have it handled, Marcus. It's an IT issue. Let's stay focused on the strategic wins here." I saw Marcus's jaw tighten. I knew that IT issue was a multi-million-dollar detail, so I gently cut in. "Actually, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice steady, "Marcus brings up a crucial point. The integrity of the historical performance data is essential for the contingent value rights to pay out correctly. We have a 3-phase migration plan to ensure that." I then gave a clear, 2-minute explanation. I wasn't trying to undermine her. I was trying to save the deal from her own incompetence. But in her eyes, I had committed the ultimate sin. I had corrected her. In public, in front of the buyers. The rest of the meeting was thick with tension. Eleanor wore her crocodile smile, but her eyes were burning a hole in my head. I knew payback was coming. I just didn't realize how public she would make it. It happened at the quarterly all-hands meeting. The whole division, over 300 of us, was gathered in the auditorium. Eleanor was on stage, giving her usual rah-rah speech. The deal with Blackwood was signed, though not yet closed and funded. She was at the peak of her power. Then she paused, a dramatic flair she loved. "As we move into a new era for Ethelred," she began, her voice dripping with fake sincerity, "we have to make sure we have the right people in the right seats. People with a forward-looking mindset." She scanned the crowd, and her eyes locked on mine. "Sometimes the very people who helped build our past are the ones holding us back from our future." The air left my lungs. This wasn't happening. "For her years of service," Eleanor continued, the poisoned magnanimity in her tone on full display, "I want to thank Sarah Jenkins for her contributions." She started a slow, deliberate clap. A few confused people joined in. My face was on fire. She was giving me a standing ovation for my own execution. She gestured for me to stand. I felt like I was moving through sludge. Then she delivered the kill shot, her voice sharp and clear over the microphone. Unfortunately, her vision no longer aligns with the dynamic future of this company. "Sarah, your role is now redundant. Security will escort you to clear your desk. We wish you the best." The auditorium fell into a dead, horrified silence. 300 pairs of eyes were on me. I saw my team, their faces a mix of shock and terror. I saw the security guards, 2 guys I knew from the lobby, start walking down the aisle toward me. It was a spectacle, a public shaming, a message to everyone in that room. Asterisk cross me, and I will not just fire you. I will unmake you. Asterisk. They walked me through the office like a criminal. My own team wouldn't look me in the eye. I packed my personal things into a sad little cardboard box, my hands shaking with a rage, so deep it felt like an illness. The last thing I saw as the elevator doors closed was Eleanor watching from her glass-walled office, a faint, triumphant smirk on her face. She hadn't just fired me. She had tried to humiliate me into nothing. She thought she'd won. She thought it was over. But as I stood on the pavement outside the building I'd called home for 14 years, holding a box of my life, a different feeling began to slice through the shame and fury. It was a cold, quiet clarity. She had taken my job and my reputation, but she had forgotten to take my memory. And my memory held the blueprints to her $400 million kingdom. If you've ever had your work stolen by a toxic boss, or been made to feel small by someone with power, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells me I'm not the only one, and honestly, it helps more than you know. The first 24 hours were a blur. I went home, put the cardboard box on my dining room table, and just stared at it, a pathetic monument to a career that had just been publicly guillotined. My phone buzzed nonstop with texts from old colleagues. Some offered sympathy, others just shock. Every ping felt like another small twist of the knife. The story was already out. A friend sent me a link to an industry blog. Ethelred VP of Strategy exits amid restructuring. Exits, like I had a choice. Eleanor's smear campaign was already underway. I was being painted as dead weight she had heroically cut loose. I spent the day pacing my apartment, replaying the auditorium scene over and over. The calculated cruelty, that smug look on her face, the humiliation. By nightfall, the hot anger started to cool and crystallize into something harder, sharper, something that felt like purpose. That night, I sat in the dark with my laptop, not to look for jobs, but to look at my severance agreement. And that's when I saw it. The paperwork was standard stuff, but a few lines jumped out. A non-compete clause, keeping me from working for a direct competitor for 18 months. A non-disclosure agreement, binding me to silence on a long list of company projects. And there it was on page 3, under the heading Confidential Projects, Chimera. She was trying to legally gag me from ever speaking about the one thing I knew better than anyone. She thought that document was a shield. I was about to turn it into a sword. My plan wasn't going to be some loud, emotional crusade. That's exactly what you would expect from a hysterical, fired female executive. No, this would be a masterclass in corporate warfare, executed with the quiet precision of a surgeon. My weapon wasn't gossip. It was a single, obscure clause buried on page 87 of the 300-page Project Chimera Acquisition Agreement, a clause I wrote myself. It was called the Contingent Value Rights Provision, or CVR. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. I knew the division we were selling had hidden potential that wouldn't show up right away. To make sure Ethelred got the full value, I built in a bonus structure. The CVR said that if the buyers, Blackwood Capital, hit specific, aggressive performance goals in the first 2 years, they'd have to pay Ethelred an extra sum, up to $50 million. It was a smart way to get more money for our company down the line. But here was Eleanor's fatal flaw, the part she dismissed as an IT issue. The CVR payouts depended entirely on measuring those goals, and that measurement depended on a perfect, flawless migration of 2 decades of technical and financial data from Ethelred's ancient servers to Blackwood's modern systems. The process was a complete nightmare of archaic file formats and forgotten data silos. It required institutional knowledge. It required a map. And I was the only person left who had drawn it. I knew the name of the server under a desk in Dallas that held original schematics. I knew the specific backup tape from 2008 with the uncorrupted baseline data. Eleanor saw the CVR as a lottery ticket. I knew it was a landmine, and the trigger was data integrity. My revenge would have 3 phases. Phase 1, the Trojan horse. My non-compete stopped me from working for a competitor. But Blackwood Capital wasn't a competitor. They were a business partner of Ethelred's. And my severance agreement had a tiny loophole. It allowed me to assist in the orderly transition of projects, if requested by a third party. Eleanor's lawyers added that to make sure I could be forced to help if needed. They never dreamed I'd use it willingly for the other side. 2 weeks after she fired me, I called Marcus Thorne at Blackwood. I kept my tone calm, professional. I framed it as a courtesy. "Marcus," I began, "I'm no longer with Ethelred, but I feel a professional obligation to see the Chimera transition through. I want to make sure your team gets what they paid for." He was cautious at first, but Marcus is a shark. He smelled an advantage. "I was sorry to hear what happened, Sarah," he said. Eleanor's move seemed abrupt. "It was," I said, letting the silence hang for a beat. "But right now my concern is the CVR. There's huge upside for you in hitting those milestones early. I want to offer my services on a private consulting basis to your team to help you navigate the data migration and unlock that value." I had just offered to show him how to make his investment wildly more profitable. I wasn't some bitter ex-employee. I was a valuable asset. He agreed to a meeting. I spent a week drafting a proposal that laid out a detailed roadmap, referencing specific server architecture I knew would make his own IT team's head spin. I was making myself indispensable. They hired me on a lucrative consulting contract before the month was out. I was now inside their camp, disguised as an ally. Phase 2, the data time bomb. My first move was a data integrity audit. Working with Blackwood's team, I knew exactly where to look. Eleanor, desperate for that $400 million headline, was pushing her people to cut corners. My old team, now leaderless and terrified of her, was just migrating the surface-level data. They were ignoring the deep archive servers, just as I knew they would. They were delivering a corrupted, incomplete data set. I didn't tell Blackwood this directly. Instead, I armed them. I drafted a series of technical verification queries, hyperspecific, expertly crafted questions designed to be impossible for Eleanor's team to answer without the complete data. Questions like, "Please provide the raw output data from the TX7 compressor efficiency tests from Q3 2011 to Q1 2012, cross-referenced with the maintenance logs from the Coventry facility's server archive, 04B. And we need a reconciliation of the pre-2015 supply chain cost data. The legacy data is in .dbx format on the Phoenix backup server. Please provide the decryption key." I knew for a fact there was no decryption key. The only person who knew the workaround was a retired engineer I played golf with. Marcus's team started sending these queries over. My old department descended into panic. Eleanor's new project manager, a yes-man she'd promoted, had no clue. He went to Eleanor, who brushed the queries off as bureaucratic nonsense. According to my friend on the inside, she snapped, "Tell them our best people are on it. Tell them to stop getting bogged down in the weeds." She was actively telling her team to ignore the very things that would prove their own incompetence. With every unanswered query, the legal case for a breach of contract was building. I was meticulously documenting every failure, every delay. I was building a fortress of evidence, brick by painstaking brick. Phase 3, the Boardroom Gambit. The deal was set to close on a Friday. The money, the glorious $400 million, was set to be wired. The following Monday was the board meeting. This was supposed to be Eleanor's coronation. She'd announce the closing of the deal, then unveil her grand 5-year plan, positioning herself as the CEO in waiting. She was so close she could taste it. It was time to light the fuse. Throughout my career, I'd made it a point to build relationships with board members. One of them, Arthur Pennington, was old school. He was in his late 70s and valued substance over style. He'd always been a quiet supporter of my work and never trusted flashy execs like Eleanor. The Thursday before the deal closed, I sent a carefully worded email to Arthur's personal address. I framed it as an act of lingering loyalty. "Dear Arthur," I wrote, "I hope this finds you well. Though I'm no longer with Ethelred, a part of me will always care about its long-term success. I spent 2 years structuring the Chimera deal, and I have some lingering concerns about the post-acquisition value that I feel a fiduciary duty to share. I kept it brief. I explained the importance of the CVR provision and the critical nature of the data migration. I didn't accuse Eleanor of a thing. I just stated facts. Then I attached a 1-page memo titled, Potential Financial Exposure in Project Chimera CVR Provision. The memo was a masterpiece of corporate judo. It listed the 5 most critical data sets required for the CVR valuation. Beside each, it listed the server name, and then it estimated the potential financial loss to Ethelred for each missing data set, a loss that could climb into the tens of millions. The document was calm, factual, and utterly devastating. Board members, especially ones like Arthur, hate risk. I ended the email with a simple, powerful sentence. I just want to ensure the board has full visibility on this, as I'm sure Eleanor has it well in hand. I hit send. The time bomb was now sitting on the boardroom table, just waiting for someone to ask the right question. And I knew Arthur was exactly the man to ask it. The story of what happened in that board meeting, told to me later by an impeccable source, was so vivid I felt like I was in the room. It started exactly as Eleanor had planned, her victory lap. She stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, radiating confidence. The CEO was beaming at her side. She walked the board through a triumphant presentation, all charts and graphs showing the glorious impact of the $400 million cash infusion. She was a conquering hero returning from battle, and the board was ready to hand her the keys to the kingdom. And so, she concluded, her voice ringing with authority, with the successful, seamless closure of Project Chimera, we have paved the way for a decade of innovation. I am incredibly proud of what my team has accomplished. She smiled, waiting for applause. Instead, she got Arthur Pennington's voice, cutting through the silence like glass. That's excellent news, Eleanor, he said, his tone mild. Arthur had this way of asking devastating questions like he was just inquiring about the weather. Truly excellent. I just have one small housekeeping question on the Chimera deal. It's about the contingent value rights provision. My understanding is that these are critical for realizing the deal's full value. My source said a flicker of annoyance crossed Eleanor's face, a gnat buzzing at her coronation. Thank you, Arthur, she said, her voice tight. That's a minor operational detail being handled by the technical teams. It has no bearing on the strategic success of the closure. She tried to move on, but Arthur didn't let go. He held up a piece of paper. My memo. I only ask, he continued calmly, because this analysis suggests a potential exposure of tens of millions of dollars if those operational details aren't handled correctly. Can you confirm for the board that the data set on, for example, the Coventry server archive, 04B has been fully migrated? Eleanor froze. She stared at the paper, having no idea what archive 04B was. She had never bothered to know. She opened her mouth to bluff, but at that exact moment, a chime sounded as every board member's laptop lit up with a new email. The CEO looked down at his screen. His face went white. Eleanor, he said, his voice dangerously low. What is this? The email was from the General Counsel of Blackwood Capital, sent to the entire board. The subject line, Formal Notice of Breach of Contract, Project Chimera Acquisition. Checkmate. On my signal, Marcus had sent the email to land at that precise minute. The email was brutally efficient. It declared Ethelred in material breach of the agreement. It stated the data handover was fundamentally incomplete, specifically citing the CVR clauses I had told them to weaponize. It referenced, by name, the dozen-plus technical verification queries that had been dismissed. And then the final, devastating paragraph. Blackwood Capital was exercising its right to place $150 million of the $400 million payment into escrow until the breach was fixed. Furthermore, they were putting Ethelred on notice that they would be seeking significant financial damages for the delay and the cost to fix the data migration, a process which their newly retained external consultant, they noted, estimated would take at least 6 months and cost millions. The room imploded. Eleanor's $400 million victory had just transformed into a $150 million holdback and a massive legal liability. The deal wasn't seamlessly closed. It was shattered. She stood there, speechless, as board members fired questions at her she couldn't possibly answer. She tried to blame her team. She tried to blame IT. But Arthur Pennington just held up my memo again. This document, which I received last week, outlined these specific risks. Were you unaware of them, Eleanor? She was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. 2 weeks later, a quiet press release announced she was leaving to pursue other opportunities. But our industry is small. The story of the COO who was so focused on the headline she ignored the fine print became a legendary, cautionary tale. Her career wasn't just stalled, it was totaled. And me? Blackwood Capital hired me on a long-term, very lucrative contract to lead the data reconciliation project. I spent the next 6 months working with my old team, the good people Eleanor had terrorized, to do the job right. I was being paid a small fortune by the company that bought my old division to fix the mess created by the boss who fired me. The irony was exquisite. Eleanor Vance tried to erase me from the company I helped build. She stood on a stage and tried to make my name a synonym for failure, but she made one fatal mistake. She thought the person she was firing was just an employee on a payroll. She didn't realize she was firing the architect, the historian, the one person who knew the foundation of her grand ambition was built on sand. She tried to erase me, but she only gave me a blank page to write my own victory. The last I heard, she was doing some low-level consulting for a firm no one's ever heard of. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything. That was my story, but I know there are thousands more out there just like it. What would you have done? Pulled a brilliant tactical move or gone for a ruthless power play? Let me know your plan in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories where corporate karma comes calling, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next.